Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm CJ Vogel, joined by Gerry Hamilton. It's Thursday. I know the recruiting breakdown's on Tuesday, but a lot's happened since then. We're going to get to some recruiting notes, some NFL draft declaration notes, as well as coaches on the road. But first, we're going to take a look at who's returning for 2025. And there's a big one with the news of edge rusher Trey Moore announcing that, hey, he's coming back to Austin, Texas, Gerry. And that's quite the addition to this Texas defense, who we saw really start turning it on that second half of the 24 season.
Yeah, CJ, we talked about it all season. The edge rush was the difference this year. A lot of people point to the secondary, the continuity, the addition of Bakuba, and that's true. And Jahdae Barron moving the corner, but it's really that edge pass rush that was the difference for this team this year defensively. And now you get to go with Colin Simmons, you got Trey Moore back. I mean, that is 14 and a half sacks right there out of two players that rotated at that spot. You have Ethan Burke back. Obviously, Colton Vosick showed well against Ohio State. You have a guy, you have some other young players coming in, but that edge spot is ready to go this next year with the addition of Trey Moore, to go with Colin Simmons, Ethan Burke returning, and all the other young players on campus. It's going to be a real strength to this team.
Yeah, I wanted to dive into some of the numbers for Trey Moore, specifically from the final 7 games of the year. And that's from November 9th against Florida on, right? So the second half of the season. How about this? In 7 games, 20 pressures, 6.5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles. Of course, he had the big one to seal the deal against Texas A&M as well. A fumble recovery, 17 total tackles. That's a good year for most edge rushers.
Yeah.
I know it took him a little bit to find that rhythm, Gerry, but that's in 7 games. If there's any sort of carryover into 2025, especially with what you would expect that second-year surge to be for Colin Simmons, well, then you start looking at Ethan Burke. Does Lance Jackson start popping into the mix as well? What's Colton Vosick look like, who had 33 pass rush attempts this year, 2 sacks, 6 pressures? That's a great win rate right there for Colton Vosick. So this edge room, as we were talking about, going to be one of, if not the strengths of this entire Texas team for 2025 in my eyes, and Moore coming back certainly solidifies that. But I want to go a little bit position by position, if you will, real quick, starting on the defensive side of the ball. Since we're there, we just spoke about the defensive end room, but Gerry, moving to the interior, Texas really only returns 2 with Alex January, who played about 95, 98 snaps this year. Melvin Hills, who we hope could take that next leap into being a rotational piece as well. There's been 2 additions, Travis Shaw, Cole Brevard, and then 3 true freshmen who, all have their own promising features. But how much can you really expect to see from that new group when you start looking at this entirety, this position group from its entirety so far?
Well, it's why they'll add a couple more guys in the portal eventually this spring, because the Ohio State game looms. And the freshmen are going to be really good players, and they're going to develop really well under Kenny Baker. They're all 3 guys that'll be on the NFL radar one day, assuming they keep ascending as prospects, that they're that talented. But early in the season, it's going to be limited snaps from those guys unless somebody just comes on and is a star from day one, which is really hard to do at that position. So that's why getting a couple other pieces in the portal is going to be key here, to have that rotation, to have that run-stopping ability early in the season while these young guys get acclimated to college football through their game reps, more than the practice reps, through their game reps. But I think you'll see at least 1 more addition, probably 2, from the portal at that position this spring.
Yeah, and moving back to linebacker, I feel really good, Gerry, about the 4-man rotation at the moment, and that, of course, includes the return of Anthony Hill, Leon Galafal, Ty Anthony Smith going into year 2, but also the addition of Brad Spence from Arkansas with 4.5 sacks. But that also doesn't include 2 freshmen who I think, look, we've both talked about Elijah Barnes and what his body transformation might look like by the fall, but also Jonathan Cunningham, who's very much on that developmental path, but coming in very similarly to what we saw from Ty Anthony Smith a year ago.
Yeah, I think this could end up being the most improved position in the program next year. I really believe that. With Brad Spence, again, he can play linebacker. You can slide him into the edge in a NASCAR package. He can get after the quarterback. He forces fumbles. He is a playmaker. So you add that with the SEC size to Anthony Hill and Leon Galafal, and Ty Anthony Smith is going to be, I think, just be a tremendous football player. So that is four frontline players. I mean, 4 really good players at linebacker. And then, as you said, you have the depth behind them with Elijah Bo Barnes and Jonathan Cunningham. I mean, this is a solid group. I expect this to be the most improved position in the program next year, and taking nothing away from the guys that just graduated. But, Brad Spence is a hell of an addition to a team that made a college football playoff with his versatility and playmaking. And then you think about Anthony Smith in year 2. I mean, watch out. And Jonathan Cunningham's in that mold long term. So Texas linebacker position's in a really good place, CJ. And then we move over to secondary and look, 2 starters back, Manny Muhammad and Michael Taft. Obviously, Jelani McDonald, and 3 actually with Jalen Gilbo as a nickel, or Jelani McDonald as a nickel, who got a couple who had starters minutes at times. So there's a lot of experience back. You got to replace the Thorpe Award winner and his backup, by the way, or a backup in Gavin Holmes and Makuba, who was a tremendous player. But at least you're coming back with some continuity there, because Michael Taft could have gone pro, and then Manny Muhammad would have been bored by himself and starting spring practice. He wouldn't have seen any familiar faces. So the young depth is really good, CJ. But the talk about kind of this spring and where this position's headed.
Yeah, this will be interesting. Of course, the big talking point coming out of the year was how well knit that secondary was for Texas, right? The 5-1-2 crew is what it was kind of atoned to. But look, you got 5 guys who, in my eyes, are kind of account for 3.5 starters coming back. You mentioned Michael Taft coming back. That's big. Manny Muhammad, another one. But then you also have, and let's not forget, Derek Williams. What does he look like coming off of that torn ACL? I know that's a long road and one that we're only expecting to see him maybe late summer, early into fall camp perhaps. But when he returns, that's another guy with a number of big snaps, especially important snaps, Jerry. That was one of the more relied upon safeties in the Texas defensive back room against Washington last year. So, and he was doing that as a true freshman. But what's going to be really interesting is their movement with Jalen Gilbo. Do they bump him outside a la the Jahdae Barron move, right? That was very unique in the sense that he was a nickel. Oh, let me go be the Thorpe. And I think that might be something on the table for Jalen Gilbo. Of course, a guy that has a very bright football intellect as well. But it also allows for Jelani McDonald, who played very well in my eyes from that back center field position, to move up closer to the line of scrimmage, where his physique and physical play style can certainly add to the Longhorns when they play a team that likes to ground and pound. So that'll be interesting. But on top of that, who's that other corner if Gilbo stays inside? Is it Santana Wilson? Is it Warren Roberson, who had some bright moments in late spring last year? Could it possibly be one of Caleb Chester or Cade Phillips? We'll see. Yeah. Of course, it certainly helps that they're on campus, Jerry. But all in all, there's a lot of positives about this Texas defense.
The fans will be very excited about the young kids, which, Jordan Johnson-Rebel, Xavier Filsaime, you mentioned Santana Wilson in that crew, Wardell Mack in that group, and then 5 freshmen that are early enrollees. Obviously, Jonah Williams will be playing baseball, sitting in on meetings, but Zealous Hicks, Grayson Littleton, Caleb Chester, Cade Phillips, that is going to be a lot of athleticism and length and future playmaking that will get a chance to develop a little bit with the return of Michael Taft and Manny Muhammad coming back in Gilbo and Jelani McDonald. So it's a good place to be if you're Texas. The question there becomes, will they go to the portal for a corner? I think spring practice will decide that.
That'll tell you. I totally agree, of course. And spring football might also tell you, do they need maybe another linebacker? Do they need a tight end? We'll see. I think right now Texas, with its 4 additions out of the portal, still looking for that right piece, maybe a wide receiver and another defensive lineman. We'll know full picture after spring football. But flipping over to the offensive side, and let's just go through this real quick. Texas feels good, obviously, about its quarterback spot with Arch Manning, Trey Owens in year 2, the addition of KJ Lacey from the 25 recruiting class. Don't need to spend a whole lot of time on that. But, Jerry, let's look at running back a little, because you do return C.J. Baxter from injury. Trey Wisner enters year 3, but a brand new stable, essentially, of 3 new running backs joining what could be year 2 of Jarrett Gibson, of course. You didn't see Christian Clark at all last year because of injury, but you also get Ricky Stewart, James Simon. A lot of bodies now in that room, yet not as much production as you would expect with that many bodies.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. Everybody will ask, how do you replace Jaden Blue out of the backfield, what he did? But look, I think it's going to be a different offense with Arch Manning. It's a different way the ball's going to be spread around, right? There's going to be more back shoulder balls. There's going to be more balls down the field. It's going to be a different way to attack the football field for Steve Sarkisian this year. And I think it's going to bring back more of the traditional inside-outside zone run game, plus then the passing game off of that with Arch's legs. So I think we're just looking at a different offense this year for the Texas Longhorns. And that doesn't mean that after the spring, you know what, if Baxter has a setback in his recovery, if they feel like they need to go get a back that's a pass catcher out of the backfield. But I tend to think James Simon is going to be a really good player. And I'm not saying by Ohio State or anything like that, but I think they have a guy that's a really good 3-down back there that can catch out of the backfield. So I just think this is going to be a different look offensively with Arch Manning at quarterback. And then, tight end, we mentioned, right, CJ? Texas is definitely looking for a tight end in the portal. They did not find one early that they absolutely thought they had to have and go push for. It's going to be Jordan Washington's show this spring. Amari Nyblack, obviously, then Spencer Shannon is a blocker. Emery Winston in Will Randall there. Nick Townsend, not a spring enrollee. So they have talent, but they are still looking for that, and we'll see what happens. CJ, to you on the offensive line, DJ Campbell returns, obviously. Cole Hudson returns. Trevor Gooseby at left tackle. Probably Brandon Baker at right tackle will be battling Kojo. Neto finally gets his shot, probably at left guard. So there's going to be a lot to be sorted out this spring at that position. But the return of DJ Campbell to go with Cole Hudson is big on the interior from an experience standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's a good nucleus to start. Of course, we've talked about Cole Hudson started his whole freshman campaign, right? And then, of course, injuries kind of opened the way for DJ Campbell to start basically every game since then. Yeah. So I think the two of them on the interior will help with that continuity. Of course, Texas is replacing 4 or 5 starters, right? 4 out of 5. But they're not necessarily losing a whole lot of age, if that makes sense. A lot of these guys are going to be year 4 guys, with the exception of Brandon Baker and Trevor Gooseby, who we already saw Gooseby can hold his own against Texas A&M, Clemson, Georgia, right? Those are not the easiest, edge rushers to just be thrown into for your first real extended action. So I think Texas fans are encouraged by that. I'm certainly encouraged by that. And I started chuckling at the onside of that, Jerry, because look, we finally get to see Neto Umeozulu. It feels like for the last 2 years, it's been, okay, can he unseat somebody? Can he? Will he? Won't he? What? All hypotheticals. Now he's the front runner, the clear front runner for that left guard spot. Of course, he needs to go win that in spring football. But I think that's really encouraging. I'll toss this to you because I know that the run game in 2024 was a bit hot or cold, right? When you look at DJ Campbell, Cole Hudson, who came from a triple option offense in high school, the physical, nasty approach of, and I don't mean nasty as in, dirty, right? I mean nasty as in you need to flip the switch and become a trench player for Neto Umeozulu. What does that run game look like for this offensive line, this projected offensive line in 25?
Yeah, so I think if Neto wins the job, he is a mover of people in the run game, right? And I think Cole Hudson, if he's the starting center, and we'll see what happens there. Cole Hudson, Connor Robinson are going to have to hold off Daniel Cruz. And I think in a best case scenario, Cruz may have one more year to kind of develop because he has not played a lot of center in his life. He's going to be a really good player, but if you get away with development another year, but he may just push his way through. But if it's Cole Hudson, then look, that's a guy that has a bigger body, probably can move people more than Jake Majors could. That doesn't mean he's going to be a better player, but in the run game. And then I'm going to throw a name out there, guys. I hear Nate Kibble's really good. Really good. So he's going to be a really good guard at Texas. The question is he going to push somebody right now? We'll see. And then you have Kojo and Brandon Baker at right tackle. And look, I think Brandon Baker is going to be good in the run game as well. And I think Gooseby, it's a spring and summer for him to continue to get stronger because he's solid in pass pro, but it's a 2-year plan for him to get strong. And that shows up in the run game. That ability to anchor, that ability to move people, right? Sink your hips and really move people. I think they have a chance to be a little better in the run game from guard to guard next year. So we'll see if that comes.
Of course, talking about all these big bodies up front, Jerry, that certainly helps in the run game, but it'll also bridge the way for Arch Manning to get the ball out to his pass catchers. And I don't want to overlook pass catchers too much because, look, Texas, Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore, that's a good starting point. Who is that third guy? Do they go to the portal? Do they use one of the true freshmen? Is it Parker Livingstone, who I've heard is having a really solid developmental curve in his first season at Texas? We know that they like throwing the ball deep, and I'll get to some numbers real quick, Jerry, but how does that rest of the room fill out? And do they need a speed guy?
Yeah, I think definitely they're going to look for somebody in the portal, that final addition to this room, because the X position, look, Texas recruited some bigger wides in this last two classes. I think the move to the SEC, facing taller, longer limb corners, also getting ready for the Arch Manning era. The back shoulder ball is going to return, more of the vertical passing game is going to return. It's going to be a different passing game, right? There's going to be more throws along the sidelines, outside the numbers, around the sticks and down the field. So you got to have bigger, longer arm guys to go make plays against SEC corners. And that's what you got in Khalil Lockett and Jamie French to some degree, Dalen McCutcheon in that DeAndre Moore role. But there, to your point, that one speed receiver, that guy that can just take the top off the defense, that Arch Manning can throw over the top to. And that doesn't mean Ryan Wingo's not a fast player at all, but just that extra piece, that extra toy for Steve Sarkisian, that's where I think we'll see a likely addition out of the portal late by Texas.
Yeah, real quick, I wanted to hit on passes over 20 yards. This is from Pro Football Focus to Ryan Wingo. 14 targets, 4 receptions for 163 yards. Jerry, that's 40.8 yards per reception for 2 touchdowns. Of course, he had a really long touchdown early in the season. Would like to see that more consistently next year. And then DeAndre Moore, who had one of the more consistent seasons when being targeted, 11 targets, 5 receptions for 150 yards. So that's 30 a pop. His thing, though, 3 of his 5 receptions beyond 20 yards went for touchdowns. You can talk about the Mississippi State ball from Arch from the slot, Quinn Ewers the Quinn Ewers throw from the slot to Moore as well against Vanderbilt. It's kind of where we like to see most of his success as well. But that'll do it for a little bit of the offensive outlook for next year as well. Jerry, I wanted to get real quick to coaches on the road because Steve Sarkisian, Pete Kwiatkowski on Thursday, made a trip up to Central Texas. They were at Temple High School seeing 2026 edge rusher Jamarian Carlton. He, of course, will be down in Austin on January 25th for the Junior Day. I got to see him a little bit in San Antonio for the Navy All-American Bowl. Said, look, Texas is one of my top schools, but we'll see where the process takes me. I'm looking forward to go seeing them and kind of learning more about how they use their edge rushers. He liked what he saw this year and hard not to based off what we talked about earlier this video. But Jerry, where else are some of these coaches headed this weekend, and where can Texas fans expect to see them stop throughout the country?
A number of the coaches went out to California on Thursday. Go see some of the top guys at Mater Dei, Orange Lutheran, those schools in SoCal. I mean, obviously Mater Dei has Caden Dixon-White, the 2026 receiver. Mark Bowman, the current 2027 tight end, if he reclasses, becomes the top tight end in America. Samuel Utu, offensive lineman, offensive tackle out at Orange Lutheran, who's also a 6'5", 295, 300-pound volleyball player, which that sounds really athletic to me. And the tape backs it up as a guy that Texas loves. So there are multiple coaches out there. Tomorrow in the Houston area on Friday, I think you'll see Kyle Flood at Klein, to see Nick Robertson, based on what I was told, out of Klein. Then you'll see Johnny Nansen at Maid Creek, to see Kosio Pala, one of the top linebackers in the country and probably the top in-state linebacker on the board. Kenny Baker will probably be at Richardson High to see Jamion Winfield, the top D lineman in-state on the board. So you're going to see a lot of those guys out and about. Then early next week, look for Tashard Choice, Kenny Baker, and maybe some others to be in Atlanta and parts of Florida as they go see some other top prospects. And those guys will include Tyler Atkinson, the 5-star linebacker, as well as Amari Latimer, the 4-star running back, both in the Atlanta area. Tico Crittenden, defensive lineman in the Atlanta area as well. So Texas staff's out and about. Recruiting never stops. First Junior Day is January 25th. There's a number of confirmations already that's in an article on ontexasfootball.com that's pinned, and we'll keep adding those guys to it.
Perfect, Jerry. Thank you very much for the updates. Of course, you can, as Jerry just mentioned, find us all on ontexasfootball.com. But that will do it for a little quick Thursday afternoon NFL draft, recruiting, look ahead to 25 roster video for today. So for Jerry, for myself, this has been On Texas Football. Y'all have a good one and hook 'em.